Hey, and welcome to this immersive historical journey. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and, if you feel like sharing, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day it is. Are you winding down late at night, or are you starting your day with a quiet look into the past? Tonight, we're stepping far away from the modern world. We're entering ancient Rome, not the empire of wars and emperors, but a very different Rome. Festive, chaotic, and strangely free. A Rome where, for just a few days each year, slaves dined like kings. Masters served their servants. The law slept, the world turned upside down, and people laughed in the face of hierarchy. This is Saturnalia, a festival of reversal, indulgence, and liberation, rooted in old fears, older gods, and the rhythm of the dying sun. So find a quiet space, dim the lights, and let the voices of a forgotten December reach you from over 2,000 years ago. To understand Saturnalia, we have to go back, long before the Roman Empire stretched from the sands of Egypt to the hills of Britannia, even before Julius Caesar ever uttered the words Veni, Vidi, Vici. The Romans worshipped a powerful and ancient god. His name was Saturn. In Roman mythology, Saturn was a god of plenty, of time, and of sowing, a stern, older deity. Saturn ruled over what the Romans imagined as a golden age, a mythical period when all human beings were equal, no one owned anything, and the earth offered food in abundance. There were no laws, no kings, no wars, no slaves. It was, of course, an illusion, but a beautiful one. And every year, the Romans tried to bring that illusion to life for a few days. They called it Saturnalia. Originally, Saturnalia was a rural, agricultural celebration. It was linked to the end of the autumn planting season, around the time of the winter solstice, when the sun was at its weakest. The earth grew cold and hard. The days shortened. Life paused. For ancient people, this was not just a time of physical darkness, but spiritual uncertainty. Would the sun return? Would the crops grow again? Would time itself continue? To answer these fears, the Romans turned to Saturn. They honored him with sacrifices at his temple. Right in the heart of Rome, on the western slope of the Capitoline Hill. This temple was among the oldest in the city, and it housed the state treasury, a symbol of Saturn's association with wealth, control, and stability. But something curious happened over the centuries. What began as a somber, rural rite gradually evolved into something far more vibrant, unruly, and strange. The Saturnalia of later centuries, especially during the height of the empire, was nothing short of a cultural inversion, a festival of. Let's pause and imagine it. It's mid-December in Rome. The streets are colder now. The city, usually busy with order and discipline, has begun to shift. Shops are closing. Government work halts. Even the Senate suspends its meetings. You begin to hear laughter in the streets, music at odd hours, and the distinct scent of roasted meats and baked sweets in the air. You pass a group of young men singing in the forum, dressed not in the stiff togas of everyday life, but in brightly colored clothing, loose tunics, party garments, even hats. They shout at a passing magistrate, and strangely, the magistrate laughs and bows to them. You see a grand house with candles glowing in the windows. Inside, a feast is underway. The master of the house is standing, serving drinks, and sitting at the head of the table is a man you've seen before, a slave. He's wearing a mock crown. He is the Saturnalicious Princeps, the king of Saturnalia, and for this brief moment in time, he gives the orders. The Saturnalia festival had many layers, some sacred, some social, and others simply chaotic fun. It officially began on December 17th, and over the years, it was extended to last anywhere from 3 days to a full week. The day opened with a formal ceremony at the Temple of Saturn. There, a priest would offer a public sacrifice to the god and then declare the beginning of the festival. The statue of Saturn itself was usually bound in woolen wrappings throughout the year, but during Saturnalia, those bonds were loosened. This unbinding symbolized freedom, not only for Saturn, but for the people of Rome as well. Following this, a grand shout would rise from the crowd. Io Saturnalia, a greeting heard on every corner in the days that followed. From that point on, the entire city seemed to step out of time. The usual Roman customs, formality, discipline, social control were suspended. Let's talk about the most famous feature, role reversal. The heart of Saturnalia was the temporary upending of the Roman social order. Slaves were allowed to speak freely. They could joke, criticize their masters, or sit at table as equals. Some sources say they were even served by their owners. In many homes, lots were drawn to select a mock king, a Saturnalia king or lord of misrule, who gave silly orders: sing a song, dance on the table, wear your tunic backwards. His commands had to be obeyed, and this ritual created a space where laughter, absurdity, and freedom temporarily replaced the strict hierarchies of Roman life. Now, it would be easy to romanticize this, but let's not forget, this was not a revolution. The Roman elite allowed these reversals precisely because they were temporary. By giving the lower classes and the enslaved a brief taste of liberty, the system relieved pressure. It kept rebellion at bay. Still, for many Romans, these days held real emotional power. They offered joy, absurdity, and a reminder, however fleeting, of a world without chains. Alongside the role-playing came gift-giving. Small presents were exchanged: wax candles, serai, clay figurines, sigillaria, dice, scarves, sweets. The gifts weren't meant to be expensive. They were symbolic, tokens of light, play, and friendship. Children, too, loved Saturnalia, not just for the gifts, but for the laughter and loosened rules. Gambling, normally frowned upon, was allowed. Tables were set out in the open. Dice rattled on marble floors. Wine flowed. And at night, the feasting. Every household prepared special meals. Ovens glowed with sweet bread and honeyed nuts. Spices from the east filled the air. Families reclined together, rich and poor, telling stories by candlelight. The streets rang with songs, jokes, and the echo of Io Saturnalia, shouted joyfully from house to house. What does it mean to turn the world upside down? Why would one of the most rigid hierarchical societies in history, Imperial Rome, willingly invite a week of chaos, mockery, and reversal? To understand Saturnalia, we must look not only at the rituals themselves, but at what they meant beneath the surface, to the Roman mind, to the political system, and to the ever-watchful eyes of emperors and elites. Saturnalia was not simply a party. It was a release valve, a way of managing the unbearable weight of control. Roman society was built on strict social layers: senators and equestrians, freedmen and slaves, masters and clients, husbands and wives, all bound together by custom, law, and often fear. To step outside of one's role, even briefly, was dangerous. And yet, once a year, they allowed it. During Saturnalia, the boundaries softened. The powerful acted foolish. The weak spoke freely. Laughter replaced authority. But crucially, only within limits. The festival had a start date, and it had an end. By allowing a brief suspension of control, the system was actually strengthened. The chaos reminded everyone of how important the usual order was. It's like a storm in a bottle. The storm rages, But the bottle is never broken, and that's where the king of Saturnalia comes in, a figure both ridiculous and deeply symbolic. He was often chosen by random lot, a servant, a commoner, sometimes even a child. He was crowned with a paper or wooden crown, given a robe, and declared the temporary ruler of the feast. He could give absurd commands, mock his betters, and make mischief. But everyone knew his reign was fiction, a dream within a cage. In some accounts, especially from the eastern provinces of the empire, this mock king may have had a darker fate. Scholars debate whether, in older or more ritualistic settings, the Saturnalia king was sacrificed at the end of the festival, a symbolic offering to the gods of time and decay. This echoes ancient Near Eastern practices, where kings were killed or exiled at the new year to renew the land and the cosmos. Whether it truly happened in Rome is uncertain, but the fear of such outcomes haunted the edges of the celebration. Imagine being crowned king for a week and wondering if, by the end, your freedom would cost you your life. Even in its most joyful form, Saturnalia carried the whisper of danger. Saturnalia was not just a domestic or religious affair, it was political. Roman emperors, especially after Augustus, had a delicate relationship with the festival. On one hand, they couldn't appear too stiff or joyless. On the other, they feared what might emerge from a crowd too free, too loud, too unafraid. Take the case of Emperor Caligula. According to some sources, during Saturnalia, Caligula once feared that a popular figure, chosen as mock king, was receiving too much attention. The laughter, the applause, it felt too real. Caligula reportedly had the man executed during the festival. And there's Nero, infamous for his theatricality. He reportedly used Saturnalia as an excuse to throw lavish banquets, dress in costumes, and mingle with the people in disguise, pretending to be one of them. But Nero's Saturnalia was a performance, one where the audience never forgot who truly held power. Later emperors, like Domitian, tried to control the chaos. He regulated the length of the festival, banned certain public games, and even tried to limit the wild feasting. But Saturnalia was a force larger than any decree. Even Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher emperor, noted in his private writings how hard it was to maintain personal discipline during Saturnalia. The temptation to indulge, to laugh, to forget the burden of rule, it pressed on even the most thoughtful of men. As centuries passed, Saturnalia began to change, not because of internal decay, but because of a growing external force, Christianity. In the early 4th century, Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity and made it increasingly central to Roman life. The old gods, once mighty, were slowly pushed aside. Their temples were closed, their festivals discouraged. But Saturnalia proved hard to kill. It was beloved by rich and poor, pagan and even some Christian sympathizers. The joy was too familiar. The lights, the food, the laughter, these were human needs, not just religious customs. And so, rather than destroy Saturnalia, parts of it were absorbed. The church declared December 25th to be the birth of Jesus Christ, not based on scriptural evidence, but to compete directly with Saturnalia and other solstice feasts. Many customs carried over. Gift-giving remained. Candle lighting and decorating homes with greenery remained. The idea of a season of joy and temporary equality lingered. Some historians believe that even the figure of the Lord of Misrule influenced medieval Christmas traditions, especially in England and France. Saturnalia faded, but its ghost survived. In carols, in laughter, in the warmth of shared tables during the coldest nights of the year. Let us now imagine the Saturnalia as it may have truly unfolded, not from a textbook, but from the inside. Let us walk quietly through each day, as if we were there. Day 1, December 17th. The sun rises pale over the Forum Romanum. The marble temples, once imposing, are softened by winter fog. It is the calends of Saturnalia, the official start. All across the city, people prepare. Shops begin to close. The law courts are silent. The Senate doors remain shut. A sacred stillness lingers in the air. But beneath it, you feel something stirring. At the Temple of Saturn, the ceremony begins. Priests in long robes gather before the great altar. The statue of Saturn, once bound in woolen cords, is now unwrapped. Its stone arms stretch freely toward the sky. An ox is sacrificed. The crowd watches. Blood stains the earth. The people shout as one. Io Saturnalia, a ritual cry, a blessing, a spark of disorder. That night, families light small candles, cere, and leave them in their windows. The flames are symbols of hope, of the returning sun, and perhaps of the golden age Saturn once ruled. Day 2, December 18th. The city has changed. You wake to singing in the streets. Not hymns, but rowdy chants, laughter, bawdy jokes. Verses from the poet Martial pass between strangers like warm bread. Slaves are not in the kitchens today. They're sitting at the tables. In some homes, their masters serve them wine or kneel to pour the first libation. Mockery is permitted, even encouraged. One slave says aloud, "I suppose tomorrow you'll remember how to bark orders again." The master only smiles. Children run door to door shouting Io Saturnalia, hoping for sweets. Vendors sell clay figurines, dice, and small bronze trinkets called sigillaria. And in every neighborhood, lots are drawn to choose a mock king, a lord of misrule. He might be a servant, or a shy boy, or the loudest drunk in the tavern. He dons a crown made of straw or paper. He stands upon a crate, and in a booming voice, he declares, "Tonight, no one goes to sleep before singing something ridiculous. He is king, for now." Day 3, December 19th. Saturnalia is in full bloom. The rich open their doors to friends, neighbors, even the poor. Guests recline on couches, not stiff in togas, but loose in colorful tunics called synthesis. Bright, festive, and scandalously relaxed. At night, great feasts are held. Tables groan with roasted goose, honeyed fruits, fish, dates stuffed with nuts, and sweet wine mulled with spices from the east. Slaves and masters drink, side by side. A senator in his 60s dares to dance. A servant girl reads poetry aloud. In that moment, just for a moment, there is no status. Gifts are exchanged. A small lamp, a wax figurine, a bundle of herbs. Poet Martial wrote a whole book of verses about Saturnalia gifts. Some clever, some crude. He once quipped, "You ask what gift to give? Give what you'd want to get, and wouldn't be ashamed of getting." Day 4, December 20th. The mood grows strange. The city is used to chaos now. People linger in the streets longer. Dice games pop up on every corner. Even women, often discouraged from public gambling, throw knucklebones under awnings. A man walks through the forum wearing a don't mask and crown. Children trail behind him, singing songs. Rumors swirl. Someone in the Subura district has declared himself Emperor of Wine. He's issued a command. Every citizen must toast a stranger. The guards do not intervene. Not during Saturnalia. That night, the mock kings begin to clash, not with swords, but with jokes, riddles, songs. It's a contest of words, of charm. One man declares, "The old order is dead, the new order is drunk." Day 5, December 21st. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year. At dawn, the streets are nearly empty. The parties from the night before lasted until the stars dimmed. A few temples hold quiet rites, not to Saturn, but to Sol Invictus. This mystery cult had gained favor in Rome, and its celebration now overlapped with Saturnalia. Firelight fills the city after dusk. Torches line alleyways. Families gather one more time around tables. Grandmothers tell stories of the golden age, of Saturn's peace, when men lived like brothers and no one hoarded wealth. Some say this is the true soul of Saturnalia. Not the mischief, but the memory of what the world could be if we stopped pretending we were different. Day 6, December 22nd. The first signs appear that the spell is breaking. Shops begin to reopen. A cart of fish rattles down the street. Children pout as the candles are extinguished. A slave carefully folds his borrowed robes, returns them to his master. The laughter feels thinner now. The mock king of the Aventine district gives one final order. All must say goodbye with a toast and a secret wish. He raises a cup. The crowd follows. Then they laugh. Then they go home. It is now the month of December, and the whole city is in a state of festive madness. Seneca, the Younger, Epistle 18. With these words written in the 1st century CE, the Stoic philosopher Seneca offers us a rare personal glimpse into what it felt like to live through Saturnalia. He was not laughing. He was not drinking. He was observing. Seneca was no enemy of joy, but he believed in balance, in moderation. Saturnalia, to him, was a storm of indulgence and noise. He wrote, "I am so far from being a slave to the festive habits of the crowd that I continue my studies during the Saturnalia." He did not condemn the celebration, but he chose to remain apart from it, like a man watching a bonfire from a distant hillside. There's something quietly haunting in his words. He admired discipline, even while understanding that most people need release. He continues, "The difference between me and the rest of the people is this. I do not regard the way they spend their time as leisure, nor do they regard the way I spend mine as work." What he reminds us is this: Saturnalia was not for everyone, even in Rome. There were those who looked upon it with unease, who saw it not as freedom, but as distraction. And yet, Seneca's silence during the festival may have been its own rebellion against a world too willing to forget itself in laughter. We now turn to another voice, more playful, more cynical, and unafraid to laugh: Lucian, the Syrian-born satirist of the 2nd century CE. Lucian wrote a short dialogue titled The Saturnalia, a comic, philosophical exchange between Cronus, Saturn, himself, and his attendant. It opens with Saturn demanding his wine and his freedom. He wants to be worshipped again, like in the good old days. Lucian writes, "Once a year, the mighty gods themselves must step aside for Saturn." In this dialogue, Saturn explains the rules of the holiday. Masters must serve their slaves. The poor must feast like kings. All order must collapse, temporarily. Lucian doesn't simply describe Saturnalia. He performs it, using parody to expose hypocrisy. He lets the gods themselves become clowns. He dares to ask, is this holiday real? Or just a joke the rich play on the poor once a year? Lucian's Saturn is both charming and bitter. He enjoys the attention, but he knows it won't last. He's a forgotten god, revived for one last party. And finally, we come to Macrobius, writing in the early 5th century CE, long after the old gods had begun to fade. His work, Saturnalia, is not a satire or a protest. It's a memory palace, a record of how the Romans once celebrated their winter festival. He imagined a group of noble Romans gathered in a villa, talking of philosophy, religion, poetry, and the stars. They recall the origins of Saturnalia, its links to Greek chronia, its connection to ancient agricultural rites. Macrobius treats Saturn not as a drunk or a joke, but as a symbol of cosmic time. Saturn, he writes, devours his children as time devours all things. He believed that Saturnalia was not merely a celebration of reversal, but of eternal return. The sun dies and is reborn. The year ends and begins again. Time collapses and reorders itself. He reminds us that chaos is part of the cosmic rhythm. We do not escape time during Saturnalia. We become conscious of it. So what did it all mean? This strange Roman holiday where slaves mocked senators, philosophers sat alone, and poets dared to write of drunken gods. Maybe it meant this: even in a brutal hierarchical world, people longed to taste a different kind of life, just for a night. A philosopher might call it a psychological safety valve. A poet might call it a golden echo. A priest might call it a dangerous temptation. And yet, every year, they lit the candles again. They poured the wine again. They said the words again, Eo Saturnalia, because laughter, however fleeting, has power. Because memory, however old, still burns. Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. Gustav Mahler, Saturnalia died, but it did not vanish. Its spirit, its customs, its human hunger for joy and reversal. They endured. They changed names. They changed forms, but the fire was preserved. Let's trace it now, from ancient Rome to the holidays we know today. When Christianity rose to dominance in the Roman Empire in the 4th century CE, it did not immediately erase Saturnalia. In fact, early Christians lived alongside it. St. Augustine, writing in the late 300s, pleaded with Christian communities to abandon the festival. Do not run to the hills to play and drink as the pagans do. Let the true light be honored. But Saturnalia was sticky, too beloved, too embedded in the rhythm of winter life. So a new celebration began to rise in its place: Christmas, observed on December 25th. Why that date? Because it aligned with the festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, whose birth was celebrated just days after Saturnalia. Early Christians saw symbolic resonance in the image of light returning to the world. The sun and the sun. And what about the customs? So, gift-giving, lighting candles, feasting, games and mockery. The reversal of roles all remained. Only the meaning shifted. Now, it was not Saturn presiding over the chaos, but Christ born into it. As Christianity became the official faith of the empire, the church faced a choice: ban these old customs entirely, or transform them. Many bishops chose transformation. Pagan practices were renamed, repurposed, sanctified. They became part of the liturgical calendar. Saturnalia's feast days were merged into Advent. Sol Invictus's birth became Christmas. The New Year games became part of Epiphany. Even the idea of the Lord of Misrule, that mock king of Saturnalia, continued. In medieval Europe, especially in England and France, towns elected a boy bishop, or Christmas king, during the 12 days of Christmas. He wore robes. He issued silly decrees. He was Saturnalia reborn, now draped in Christian velvet. Let's now jump forward 1,000 years to snowy Europe, to roaring hearths, to sleighs and carols. By the 1600s, a character begins to appear in English folklore: Father Christmas, a jolly bearded man who brings mirth and mischief during the 12 days. He is not yet St. Nicholas, not yet Santa Claus, but he is a spirit of Saturnalia, large, laughing, and loose with rules. In many depictions, he wears green robes, echoing the evergreen plants of winter festivals: holly, ivy, and fir. He enters homes not to judge, but to restore joy. He encourages games, wine, and dance. He is Saturn in disguise, tamed and softened. And then, in the 1800s, something remarkable happens. The Dutch bring Sinterklaas to America. Clement Clark Moore writes The Night Before Christmas. Thomas Nast draws the first images of a fat, red-coated Santa. The old god, once feared, once worshipped, is now jolly and round, bringing toys. He rides a sleigh instead of a chariot. He gives gifts instead of omens. But at his heart, he is still the keeper of winter mischief. But Saturnalia's legacy doesn't end at Christmas. It pulses through. New Year's Eve, with its parties, countdowns, and collective reversal. Carnival and Mardi Gras, masked balls, dancing, rule-breaking before Lent. Epiphany's Three Kings Day, where children still receive gifts across the world. Purim, Holi, and Maslenitsa, cross-cultural echoes of winter chaos and joy. Anthropologists call these liminal rituals, sacred times of suspension, times where roles bend, rules loosen, and societies remember what they usually forget. That joy is not a luxury, it's a survival instinct. So what is Saturnalia now? A footnote in history? A distant, drunken Roman memory? Or is it still alive in the laughter of a child opening a gift, in the candle lit on a dark winter night, in the moment when a boss pours coffee for an intern just to be kind? Maybe Saturnalia is not a date. Maybe it's a mood, a mirror held up to society, a chance, once a year, to ask, what if the world were different? What if power meant service? What if we remembered joy? Festivals are not merely days off. They are acts of memory and of imagination. Unknown Roman philosopher, as remembered through time. Now, close your eyes just for a moment. Picture again the flickering candlelight of an old Roman home. Children laughing in tunics. A master S. A feast stretching late into the night. That was Saturnalia. But it was more than a party, more than games. It was a deliberate dream, a rehearsal of another world. We began this journey over 2 hours ago. Together, we walked the streets of ancient Rome. We entered homes, temples, and mines. We saw Saturn freed from his bindings, slaves treated as equals. For a moment, masters mocked and smiling, philosophers retreating into silence, children receiving gifts by candlelight. The whole empire, for 7 days, turning itself inside out. Why? Because every society, no matter how rigid, needs to bend, or it will break. Because people need release. Because laughter has the power to heal power itself. We no longer worship Saturn. We no longer crown lords of misrule. But do we still long for a moment when rules fade and joy breaks through? Look around. A boss wears a Santa hat and brings cake. A teacher tells a student, "You don't need to raise." A lonely neighbor is invited to dinner. A city pauses just to light a tree. These are not just customs. They are echoes. Echoes of a time when joy was a kind of ritual defiance. A reminder that beneath the layers of class, law, duty, and decorum, we are all simply human. Saturnalia reminds us to give without reason, to laugh without shame, to see those we usually overlook, even if just for a night. Time moves forward, always, but in festivals and in memory. Time circles back. The sun returns. The days grow longer. Spring will come, and so will another chance to remember Saturn. Not the god, but the idea that the world, as it is, does not have to be the world as it must be. In Saturnalia, the Romans allowed themselves to play, to pretend, to hope, and in doing so, they taught us something eternal. Wherever you are now, whatever the hour, whatever your role in life, let this be your Saturnalia. Light a candle, laugh with someone unexpected, give freely, speak kindly. Let the world be strange and soft, just for a moment. Because the golden age may not be lost. It may simply be waiting for us to remember how to live like it again. So raise a glass to Saturn, to joy, to reversal, to renewal. Io Saturnalia. Say it, just once. Feel it echo. If you've reached the end of this 2-hour journey, you've just walked through over 2,000 years of history, imagination, and celebration. Thank you. If this story moved you, even slightly, I invite you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from and what Saturnalia means to you, and share this with someone who needs a little light this winter. Until next time, friend, may your days be merry and your spirit remain unbound. Io Saturnalia, forever. End of documentary. Tonight, we'll travel back over 700 years to a time when most people had never traveled more than a few miles from where they were born, when literacy was rare, and when looking up at the sky wasn't a curiosity, it was a source of fear. This is a story about how people in the Middle Ages understood the sky, about how they interpreted stars, comets, and eclipses, and how those beliefs shaped the choices they made in their daily lives and in times of crisis. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it as you settle in? Are you lying in bed, taking a quiet moment on the couch? And if you enjoy this kind of slow, historical storytelling, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps us keep going. It's the year 1263. In most of Europe, the average person had no formal education. They couldn't read Latin, and they had never seen a map of the Earth, let alone the solar system. Scientific knowledge existed, but it was limited to monasteries, universities, and a few royal courts. Even there, it was mixed heavily with religion, superstition, and classical ideas dating back to ancient Greece. To the common person, the sky wasn't just a background to daily life. It was a place of meaning, the idea of a heliocentric model, that the Earth revolved around the sun, wouldn't appear in serious form until the 16th century. In the 13th century, people believed in the geocentric view, that Earth stood still at the center of the universe, and everything, the sun, the moon, the stars, revolved around it in perfect spheres. This model came from the works of Ptolemy, combined with religious teachings. The sky was made up of fixed layers: the moon, the planets, the sun, and the stars, each embedded in a crystal sphere. Beyond that was heaven. So when something unusual happened in the sky, a comet, a lunar eclipse, or a star that seemed to move strangely, it wasn't seen as a natural event. It was seen as a message, sometimes from God, sometimes from darker forces. People believed eclipses could bring disease, war, or famine. In some regions, eclipses were linked with the death of kings or the downfall of cities. Even highly educated churchmen would sometimes treat them with caution, gathering people to pray when the sun turned dark. Comets, in particular, caused fear. They were called hairy stars, and their sudden, unpredictable appearance made them feel unnatural. Chronicles from the time often link comets with real events. the death of rulers, the outbreak of plague, or great fires. Whether these events were truly connected didn't matter. What mattered was the timing. And timing was everything. In a small Bavarian village in 1263, these beliefs would have shaped daily life. There were no calendars on the wall, no accurate timekeeping. Seasons were tracked by the church's holy days, and the moon was used to plan planting, harvests, and even childbirth. If a lunar eclipse appeared, as it did in July of that year, families might light candles, cover mirrors, or gather to pray. Some would believe that demons or spirits were loose. Others would fast for days, asking for protection. To the modern listener, these reactions may sound strange, but to them, it was a form of survival. In a world where explanations were few, interpretation was how people made sense of the unknown. And in one of those small villages, a man named Alaric had begun to ask quiet questions. He was not a priest, not a noble, just a scribe's assistant in a monastery on the edge of the woods. He copied texts, he sharpened quills, he prepared inks, but more than that, he looked up. Alaric had seen the eclipse, he had heard the rumors, but instead of fear, he had felt curiosity. And curiosity in the Middle Ages was sometimes the most dangerous thing of all. In the monastery of St. Eberhard, not far from the Rhine, Alaric spent most of his hours hunched over parchment. He wasn't a monk, not yet. He had taken no vows, worn no habit, but he was allowed to work in the scriptorium, a cold stone room where daylight poured through narrow windows and silence was sacred. His task was simple: to copy old texts, scripture mostly, psalms, sermons, hagiographies, but sometimes, mixed in with the prayers and lives of saints, were ancient manuscripts, Greek and Arabic works, translated and passed down, often heavily censored, but still bearing traces of unfamiliar ideas. That's where he first read the name, Aristotle, and then Al-Farabi, Averroes, Ptolemy. These names weren't spoken aloud in the halls. The monks were cautious, even suspicious of foreign knowledge. But the pages didn't hide. And Alaric, in his quiet way, began to wonder, what if the stars weren't divine messages, but distant, burning stones? What if the earth didn't sit still, unmoving? He didn't ask these questions aloud. Not yet. But he started noticing. On certain nights, when the sky was clear and work had ended, Alaric would slip out past curfew. He'd walk beyond the walls into the open field behind the orchard and look up. No telescopes, no charts, no tools. Just eyes and a growing sense that something wasn't right. The stars didn't always behave. Some moved faster than others. Planets, or wandering stars as they were called, would retrograde, shifting backward unexpectedly. Eclipses came, but not always with disaster. Comets appeared, but sometimes nothing followed. Why did the stars not align with the fears? Why did the sky not obey the stories? In the scriptorium, he found a passage, one likely overlooked by the others, from an old copy of a lost Roman treatise, barely legible. We earth may not be at the center, for it casts a shadow that moves. It was vague, probably wrong, but it stayed with him. That week, Alaric did something bold. He copied the passage into a small parchment scrap and hid it beneath his bedding. He began watching the moon more carefully, tracking its phases, noting its distance from certain stars. He made crude marks on bits of wood and stone, lining them up from night to night. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He didn't think of it as science, but it felt like something true. And more than that, something his own. Still, whispers in the abbey were changing. Another novice, a boy named Matthias, had seen Alaric outdoors at night. He'd mentioned it during morning prayer. and the prior, a stern man named Brother Ulrich, had started asking small questions. Do you sleep well, Alaric? Why does your ink seem unfinished lately? What draws you to the stars? The questions weren't threats. Not yet. But in the 13th century, curiosity wasn't always seen as a virtue. To question the heavens was to question the order of the world. And the church did not take kindly to disorder. That autumn, the sky changed. It began with a faint glow, a reddish hue that crept along the northern horizon just after dusk. By the third night, it had spread higher, a shimmering curtain of scarlet, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Villagers whispered of omens. The monks called for prayer. They had no name for it. We now know it as an aurora, caused by solar particles hitting Earth's magnetic field. But in 1263, it was nothing short of a divine warning. Brother Ulrich gathered the monks in the chapel that night. Candles burned low. Psalms were chanted for protection. Some wept. Others confessed sins aloud, fearing the end of days. But Alaric simply watched. He had never seen anything like it. It didn't feel like judgment. It felt natural, beautiful, patterned. But patterns in that time could be dangerous. The next day, he was called into the prior's quarters. The room was plain. Wooden table, crucifix on the wall, a copy of Augustine's City of God. Ulrich motioned for him to sit. You've been observed, he said, without anger. Out at night, with stones, measuring shadows, watching the sky. He paused. Do you believe the stars speak lies? Alaric didn't answer. Not because he was defiant, but because he wasn't sure. He hadn't found truth, only questions. And in the Middle Ages, questions could burn like heresy. Ulrich's gaze lingered. The heavens declare the glory of God, he recited. They are not to be measured, but revered. Then, softer, be careful what you chase, Alaric. The stars will not chase you back. That evening, Alaric returned to the scriptorium. Alone, he opened a hidden drawer beneath the writing bench and removed the parchment scrap. The passage from the old Roman text, the one that suggested movement. A world not fixed, and beside it, he placed a new scrap of his own, a diagram. But it showed something that no one in his world believed. The earth, not at the center. The sun, fixed. The planets, circling. He wasn't the first to imagine it, but he was imagining it alone, in a monastery, in a century not yet ready. Part 4. The weight of silence. The next few weeks passed quietly. The aurora faded. The monks returned to their routines. But something in Alaric did not. He continued his work, copying sermons, boiling ink, trimming parchment. But at night, the sky remained his teacher. He tracked Venus through its phases, noticing its brightness waning, then returning. He mapped the moon's arc against a carved post near the abbey wall. And more troublingly, he started writing in the margins. Not overtly, not enough to be noticed, but just enough to remember. Why does Mars move backward? Why do eclipses repeat every 18 cycles? What if the Earth is moving? He wasn't writing for anyone. He didn't expect discovery or fa. He was writing for one reason only, so that he wouldn't forget what it felt like to notice something no one else dared to. In the village nearby, a man had fallen ill. Then 2 more. The monks spoke of plague. Superstition returned with force. Some blamed the strange lights in the sky. Others blamed sin, pride, or foreign winds. One monk whispered that the sickness was a punishment, for prideful eyes lifted too high. Alaric heard this, and said nothing. But that night, he buried the diagram beneath the roots of an elm tree behind the orchard. He would not burn it, but he would not risk it either. He returned to his cell, lay flat on the straw mat, and watched the flicker of candlelight on the ceiling. And he thought, even if the world is moving, I am standing still. Winter came early. The wind through the stone walls of the abbey whispered like voices. Frost covered the glassless windows of the scriptorium by sunrise. The ink froze in the pots unless warmed by candle heat. But Alaric kept working. He was now copying a Latin edition of Genesis, line by line. Creation. In 6 days. The firmament, above, the waters, below. He didn't skip a word. But as he wrote, and God made 2 great lights, the greater, to rule the day. His eyes paused. He had seen the phases of Venus. He had seen the moon shadow move across the face of the sun. 2 lights, he thought, but what of the others? The ones that move, that disappear, and return. The monks called them wanderers. But wandering suggested purpose, and Alaric was beginning to believe the sky had no purpose at all. He had been trained under men who had access to translated Arabic manuscripts and even some forbidden Greek cosmologies. He spoke carefully, but with curiosity. In the dining hall, after evening prayers, Alaric approached him. "May I ask," he began, voice low, "do your scholars believe the earth is fixed?" Petrus paused mid-spoonful of broth. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Officially, yes, all things revolve around it. A beat, but not all of us are so certain." That night, the 2 spoke for hours under the cloister's arches. Whispers only, not theories, just possibilities. Petrus spoke of men like Alhazen, who studied optics and the behavior of light, of Copernicus, just a boy now in Poland, but born into a world that might change, of the Greeks who once believed the earth spun slowly, quietly, unseen. Alaric didn't feel hope. He felt weight. Will these ideas ever be spoken aloud? Perhaps, Petrus said, or buried again, until a knot. Weeks passed. Petrus left. Snow covered the paths between abbey and field. Alaric did not speak of the stars again, but something in him would not still. One afternoon, beneath a heavy gray sky, he walked to the elm tree, the one near the orchard, where months ago he had buried his parchment. The soil was stiff, the parchment damp but still legible. The diagram had changed nothing. No one had seen it. No one would, but it was his. His quiet refusal. Later that evening, a fire broke out in the scriptorium. No lives were lost, but several shelves of texts were damaged. The monks called it a punishment. They prayed for days. Alaric said nothing, but stared long at the hole in the ceiling through which smoke had escaped. It pointed straight to the stars. His name was Tomas, a boy of perhaps 13, newly arrived from the lowland villages. Thin wrists, quiet voice, eyes that lingered too long on things others ignored. He was assigned to the scriptorium. His job, grind pigments, warm ink over flame, clean the brushes. Alaric noticed how he stared at the sky while walking between buildings. Not out of wonder, but out of habit. So, one evening, as they sat sorting parchment, Alaric asked softly, "What do you see when you look up?" Tomas shrugged, hesitant. "The moon, mostly. The red star sometimes moves." "Mars," Alaric said gently. "It appears to move backward." Tomas blinked. "How?" Alaric paused. The safe answer was, "Because God wills it." The true answer had no place in that room, but he gave it anyway. "Because perhaps we are moving too." The next week, Tomas returned with a question of his own. "If the sun doesn't rise, but we turn, why don't we feel it?" Alaric smiled faint. He showed Thomas how to use a plumb line to measure angles, how to note the sun's position at fixed times each day, how to mark the shortening days on the stone wall by the well. They spoke in quiet tones, always alone, always in questions, never in declarations. That was their safety. Winter deepened. By candlelight, Thomas copied a strange diagram under Alaric's guidance. A circle within a circle, smaller bodies spiraling outward, the sun in the middle. Not truth, just a theory, not a claim, only a drawing. Alaric wrapped it in waxed linen and placed it behind a loose stone in the dormitory wall. Not to spread, not to publish, just to exist. Outside the monastery, rumors swirled of growing tensions. The plague had returned in nearby cities. A comet had been seen, a burning line across the sky. Panic was rising again. The monks interpreted it as judgment, but Alaric and Thomas watched in silence. "They see a message," Alaric whispered. "We see a pattern." In the spring, a new bishop visited. He praised the abbey's discipline. He asked polite questions. And then, he requested the review of all teaching materials, including any diagrams or unusual texts. Alaric felt the chill of something coming undone. He removed the parchment from the wall and burned it himself before anyone could find it. Thomas wept silently. Alaric said only, "Better it burn than you." Weeks passed. Thomas no longer asked questions aloud, but his gaze spoke for him. Alaric could see it in the way the boy would trace invisible lines in the dirt with a stick, or stack stones in curved patterns near the herb garden. He was beginning to think in circles. The monastery had strict hours of silence now. Even meals were taken in quiet. Only the prior spoke, reading aloud from scripture while others ate. But Thomas and Alaric had found new ways to share ideas. A glance toward the rising moon. A faint gesture when a cloud passed over the sun. Chalk lines drawn on the back of discarded parchment, then quietly burned by nightfall. These were not protests, not revolts. They were exercises in noticing. One afternoon, Thomas brought Alaric a fragment of stone. It was smooth and dark, flat on one side. "It reflects," the boy whispered, "but only a little." Alaric turned it in his hand. It was obsidian, likely from a long-dead traveler's pouch. Rare here, but not impossible. They placed it on a flat table, and with a pinhole above it, observed how sunlight moved across its face, slowly, predictably. "The light changes," Thomas said, "but the motion is constant." That evening, Alaric added a quiet note in his personal journal, a codex he kept hidden in a hollowed-out Bible cover. Even in silence, discovery breathes. Summer came late that year. The fields near the abbey were slow to ripen. Insects swarmed the grain stores. One monk claimed he saw blood rain from the sky, though it was likely red dust carried from southern lands. Still, fear spread. A rumor began that someone in the monastery had drawn stars with no angels near them, that a boy had been heard asking why the sun turned when it should simply rise. It was small, but small rumors grow teeth in dark places. Alaric instructed Thomas to speak to no one unless spoken to nod politely, to return early from all tasks. "Your mind," he said, "is not theirs to borrow." Thomas obeyed, but he did not stop observing. One morning, after prayer, he whispered, "What if the stars don't move at all?" Alaric looked at him, not with pride, not fear, but recognition. The boy had crossed a threshold. He would never return. The monastery had grown quieter, not by rule, but by instinct. There was a sense that something was being watched, not by God, but by men. Brothers who once shared bread and stories at dusk now nodded without speaking. The candlelit halls that echoed with soft chant were still, except for the sound of parchment turning in the library. Thomas no longer asked questions, even in whispers. He had learned to observe in silence, a form of reverence, or perhaps self-preservation. He began charting the moon's rise using stones, flat ones from the garden, each one nudged a little every evening. It formed a crescent ring over time. Imperfect, yes, but enough to see a pattern. Alaric noticed. "You're building a calendar," he said quietly one morning. Thomas nodded. "To know when it's the same night as before," he answered, "but under a different sky." Alaric didn't respond. He only turned back toward the chapel. But that night, he slipped Thomas an old scroll, thin, brittle, barely legible, written in Latin with diagrams of concentric spheres and notes in a trembling hand. "Spheres upon spheres," it read, each turning the one below. The geocentric model. Aristotle's great gift to the ages, still unchallenged here. But for Thomas, it raised more questions than it answered. That week, Thomas found an old warped lens, part of a damaged reliquary gifted by a noble years before. It wasn't much, but held to the eye, it shifted the world, ever so slightly. He began using it to watch the stars, or rather, their tremble, and he noticed. Not all stars stayed fixed. One in particular, faint, red, slightly erratic. "A wanderer," he whispered. "It doesn't obey the dome." It was Mars. He did not know its name, but he knew its defiance. He sketched its arc on spare parchment, line by line, night after night, each one an act of quiet heresy. Meanwhile, the monastery had grown suspicious. A novice had discovered strange markings behind the chapel's wall panels. Others whispered about shadows that move without sun. It was nonsense, mostly, fear feeding on itself. But Alaric had seen this before. Long ago, in another town, where a man too curious had been accused of summoning storms with his gaze. That man had burned, so Alaric made a choice. He gathered Tomas's papers, the star maps, the shadow diagrams, even the notes about the moon, and one night, by lantern light, he placed them into a small satchel. He handed them to Tomas at the garden's edge. "Take the donkey trail east," he said. "There's an abbey 3 days from here that trades in glass and ink. Ask for Brother Leon." Tomas looked confused, frustrated. "But I was so close," he whispered, "so close to seeing how it all fits." Alaric placed a hand on his shoulder. "You still can," he said, "but not here." Tomas left before sunrise. The satchel was light. Just a few scrolls, the broken lens, some bread wrapped in cloth. The road was rough and unpaved. A thin trail through dew-covered grass and low fog. He passed no one, only the crows, watching from trees without leaves, and the echo of bells from the monastery, already fading behind him. For the first time in months, he could think without whispering, and in that silence, the sky felt larger. 3 nights later, he reached the Abbey of St. Leon, tucked between hills and barely more than a stone rectangle with a red clay roof. They welcomed him as a traveler, not a scholar. He didn't correct them. Inside, a small scriptorium smelled of vinegar and lamp oil. A few monks copied texts with tired eyes. One of them, a thin, tall man, looked up. "You were sent by Alaric," he said. "I remember his letters." This was Brother Leon. Older than Thomas had expected, but sharp-eyed, he invited Thomas to sit. Thomas unrolled the scrolls. Leon studied the lines, the moon phases, the path of the wanderer star, the shadow circles drawn beneath a window frame. And then, he smiled. "You've seen more than most of us are allowed to know," he said. almost kindly. Over the following weeks, Tomas stayed in a storeroom beside the chapel. Not a cell of punishment, but a room where he could read, copy, and think. Leon gave him access to the small collection of translated texts, fragments of Arabic astronomy, Jewish calendrical charts, and 2 damaged Greek commentaries on Ptolemaic spheres. And from these, Tomas began to realize the stars did move, but not as a solid dome. They spun each on their own layer, spheres within spheres, each one transparent, like glass. The earth was still at the center, of course, but something inside him cracked just slightly. What if, he whispered one night, what if we are not the center, but only appear to be? He didn't speak it aloud, not yet. The penalty for such thinking, even in the safest places, was exile or worse. But he kept watching Mars, kept noting the retrograde loop it made across the winter sky, a backward wiggle, impossible to explain with F. He traced the path again and again. This motion, it's like we're moving too. But again, he said nothing, only wrote and thought and breathed. Months passed, spring returned, the air warmed, the monastery garden bloomed in quiet patterns. Leon taught Tomas how to grind a new lens. They used polished sand and goat hide, pressed slow and steady across glass circles no bigger than a coin. And with those lenses, they built a simple tube, a spyglass, crude and narrow. But when pointed at the moon, Tomas gasped. It's not smooth. Indeed, the surface was rough. Craters, lines, ridges. The heavens, once believed to be perfect and unblemished, now looked much like Earth. Rough, scarred, real. That night he wrote, if the moon is like Earth, perhaps the heavens are not above us, but around us and within us. He never published it, but the manuscript survived. Hidden between the pages of a religious calendar, later smuggled across mountains, copied by another monk who never wrote his name. And in time, years, decades later, it reached the hands of a man in Italy who would later teach a boy named Galileo. Part 16. Silence, Light and Memory. Tomas died quietly in the Abbey of St. Leon. His grave was marked only by a stone and a single word, Viator, the traveler. No one remembered his face, but his questions, those soft, patient questions, whispered into candlelight, traveled much farther than he ever did. And long after the towers fell, long after the monasteries were emptied, his words remained. Not because they were loud, but because they were true. And that, dear listener, was the story not of a hero, but of a man who asked questions in a world that punished them. Thank you for staying. If you're still with us, perhaps you've already drifted a bit, or maybe you're wide awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the stars and whether they move or whether we do. Either way, leave a comment telling us where you're listening from, what time it is, and whether you believe the sky above is still or alive. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you again in another time, in another quiet corner of the past. Good night. Hello. This is a story about a time long before ours, a time when people lived quietly among rocks, trees, and open skies, a time when their lives were shaped by the slow rhythms of weather, seasons, and movement. No grand events, no sudden changes, just the steady passage of days. Before we begin, I wonder, where are you watching this story? What time is it for you now? Feel free to leave a note if you like. If you enjoy quiet stories like this, consider liking and subscribing. It helps the channel continue. Now, if you're ready, we will start. In modern times, people often ask the question, Did early humans have a concept of personal space? This question, like many others about prehistoric humans, has no definitive answer. Archaeological records do not provide conclusive evidence about personal boundaries. There are only fragments, stone tools, charred bones. Personal space, being an abstract social concept, leaves no fossil record. Nonetheless, anthropologists hypothesize that early humans may have exhibited rudimentary spatial preferences based on group behavior observed in other primates. These speculations, however, remain unconfirmed. It was perhaps 400,000 years ago. The terrain was flat in some areas, rocky in others. Trees existed, so did shrubs. A group of humans walked, then stopped. Then they walked again. The climate was not the same as today, but not completely different either. There were clouds. Sometimes it rained. One of these early humans was named Og. Of course, he was not really named Og. The concept of naming was not yet linguistically codified in any consistent form. But for the sake of clarity and continuity, he shall be referred to as Og. Og was approximately 1.62 meters tall. His body mass index was within what might today be considered a healthy range. He had limbs, eyes, and a cranium that could accommodate basic reasoning functions. He made sounds. These sounds did not form a structured language, but conveyed simple meanings like food, danger, or come here. There were no verbs. There was no grammar. One day, Og woke up. It was morning. The sun had risen. The sky was somewhat overcast, but not entirely. Og sat up. He scratched a part of his skin. Then he stood. He looked at a tree for about 11 seconds. Nothing happened. He turned away from the tree. His fellow group member, whom we will call Erg, was chewing on something. It was fibrous and possibly edible. Erg did not offer Og any of it. Og did not ask. At some point, Og decided to walk approximately 37 meters away from the group. He squatted. He did something private. Then he stood up again and walked back. No one reacted to this action. If they had, we do not know, but they probably did not. Og's group was composed of 10 individuals. They were not a family, though some of them shared genetic material. They existed together in what could loosely be termed a social unit. They sometimes groomed each other. Other times, they did not. There was no visible hierarchy, but certain individuals were permitted to eat first. This was not codified in any system. It was simply tolerated. Og walked again. This time, he walked longer, perhaps 20 minutes. During this walk, he encountered a rock. He picked up the rock. The rock was slightly heavier than he expected, but not excessively so. He turned it in his hand. Then, he dropped it. He continued walking. He saw a small body of water. It was not large enough to be called a lake. It was not moving enough to be called a river. It was water, and it was there. Og approached it. He looked at it. Then he crouched and drank some of the water. The water was not salty. This was fortunate. A bird flew by. Og looked at it. Then he stopped looking at it. Later, Og returned to his group. They were sitting. Some were eating. Others were doing nothing. Og sat. He did nothing. Time passed. A long time. At least 17 minutes. Then something happened. Erg moved closer to Og. The distance between them decreased. It is possible this made Og uncomfortable. If so, he showed no visible signs of discomfort. Or if he did, we cannot say what they were. Still, Erg eventually moved away again. This may indicate some early awareness of Og's spatial preferences, or it may have meant nothing. At night, the group sat near a small fire. The fire had been started earlier in the day using friction and dried grass. It was not a large fire. The group sat around it, not in a circle, but in an irregular cluster. Og was nearest to the fire. This was not a privilege. It was simply the place he had chosen to sit. He watched the flames. They moved. Someone coughed. The group slept. Days passed. Then weeks. Then more days. Og repeated many of the same actions. He walked. He drank. He watched. He sat. Once he touched another human's shoulder, perhaps by accident. The other human did not visibly respond. This might be considered an early test of personal space, or it might have been meaningless. Eventually, Og became older. He lost strength in his limbs. He sat more often. His contributions to the group decreased. Then something not well understood happened. Og appeared to stop breathing, but then resumed. He was not gone. He was not strong either. For 3 cycles of light and dark, he lay still, blinking. On the 4th day, he sat up. The group, having remained nearby out of habit more than concern, did not appear surprised. Og blinked more. He coughed. Then he stood, very slowly. His return to activity was not a full recovery. He remained slower. But from this point on, something subtle changed. Og no longer sat near others. He would adjust his position if someone came too close. This adjustment was not aggressive. It was not deliberate. It simply occurred. The others did not always notice. When they did, they moved too. Not out of respect, but because something in the group dynamic shifted when Og repositioned. Proximity to Og became associated with mild uncertainty. One day, a new group arrived. They were similar, but not the same. There were glances, grunts. One from the new group, taller than Og, approached too closely. Og did not move back. He stood still. The taller one grunted again. Then Og walked away. He found a new sitting place. It was several paces further from the group than usual. The tall one did not follow. This repeated. Over time, others in Og's original group began copying his distances. Not all the time, but often enough that the new group noticed. No confrontation occurred, but the groups maintained distance. There was no conflict. There was no union. There was spem. One might say personal space had emerged, slowly, without rules, without discussion. But it had shape, and it had weight. And Og, mostly unaware of this effect, lived the rest of his days with slightly more room around him than he had before. He sat often. He watched more. Others did not sit too close. This was enough. After Og, there was Thu. Thu was born to the group, possibly the child of someone who had once groomed Og, possibly not. There was no memory. The group never used the past in their gestures. What had happened did not carry through days. Only behaviors did. Thu walked with the group, but she often walked several steps behind. Not because she was weak. She was not. It was simply what she did. When another walked too near her, she shifted slightly. There was no sound, no expression, just a shift. Eventually, the others began to expect her to shift. When sleeping, Thu positioned herself near rocks or trunks. She liked the feeling of having one side protected. When this was not possible, she curled in a tighter form. No one copied this, but no one disturbed her either. One evening, a younger group member named Egg moved close to Thu. He lay down with his arm grazing hers. Thu stood up. She did not leave the firelight. She moved to the other side. The motion was not sudden. Egg did not react, but he did not try again. In the following days, others adjusted where they sat when Thu approached. Not far, but enough. No conflict arose. No understanding did either. There were only movements. The fire remained small. The group remained 10. Sometimes 9, sometimes 11, then back to 10. Space now was part of movement. It was part of walking, sitting, and sleeping. It was never mentioned, but it was there. A dry season came. The trees had fewer leaves, the shrubs were brittle. Animals moved less frequently and in more linear paths. Water required walking, sometimes a long time. The group walked more. Thu still trailed behind. The others did not question it. One day, while foraging, Thu found a shallow pit in the dirt where water had collected under a sloping stone. She drank. Then she moved away. She made no signal. Later, others arrived. They saw the prints her feet had left. They saw the drops of moisture near the stone. They found the water. Thu did not lead them there, but she had not stayed to conceal it either. It was not shared, but it was not withheld. This repeated. Her distance meant she found things first. Small things. A mushroom. A spot of shade. A path that led to nothing, but with fewer thorns. Others began to observe from a farther distance. Without agreement, they left more room around Thu. When she stood, they did not follow. When she stopped, period. When she moved again, they followed loosely. This was not strategy, it was pattern. The dry season passed. Some had left the group. Others had joined. The fire remained small. The group sat with spaces between. It did not form a shape. It simply formed. No one asked why. But the space stayed. After the dry season, rains returned. They were not constant, nor were they absent. They occurred at intervals that did not follow a precise pattern. Sometimes they came during sleep. Other times, they came during movement. The group did not prepare for them. When it rained, they waited under trees or shallow overhangs. When the rain stopped, they resumed what they were doing before, unless they had forgotten. Thu remained. Others did not. The group changed. The group always changed. There was a male named Drak. He had a scar on his leg that was not visible at a distance, but became visible when he sat. He did not speak often, but none of them did. He stood near others more than was typical. Thu did not move when Drak stood near her, but she did not stay either. When she moved, it was slow, and it was not far, but it was away. Drak noticed this. He did not react. But in the next evenings, he sat near others instead. He did not sit near Thu again. Another figure joined the group during this time. She was older than Thu, but had fewer marks on her skin. Her name is not known. For clarity, she will be referred to as Lo. Lo walked at an even pace. She neither trailed nor led. When others rested, she often stood. She did not sleep early. When she did sleep, it was near the edge of the group, but not where Thu slept. A different edge. Eventually, Thu and Lo stood at the same time. They looked at similar directions. Once, they both turned when a bird flew overhead. They did not look at each other, but they were aware of the other's awareness. They both walked slower than the rest. Not in unison, but close enough that others noticed. The group began to leave more room for them. Not out of deference, not out of belief, only because that was what the spacing now was. When the group ate, they sat in a dispersed cluster. There was no defined center. Some chewed, others waited. Some moved while chewing. No one instructed this. No one objected. Once, a younger male, barely taller than the grasses in early growth, tried to sit between Thu and Lo. There was space, but it was not enough space. Thu rose. She walked 6 steps and crouched again. Lo did not move, but she adjusted her torso by 10 degrees. The younger male paused. He did not finish sitting. He moved to another spot. The moment was quiet. It did not last long, but its memory remained in the group's spacing. From then on, a loose awareness developed. The place where Thu sat would remain slightly larger than her own body. No one designated this space, but it remained. Lo's presence amplified this. Though she never moved when crowded, others began leaving space near her too. Not because of who she was, but because of what she didn't do. Eventually, Lo coughed repeatedly over several dark light cycles. Her body leaned forward more often. Her hands stayed on the ground longer. Then she stopped moving altogether. The group did not gather. They watched from their places. Thu sat near a rock. She watched, too. Then she turned away. By nightfall, Lo had not moved. The group moved the next day. Lo did not. This was not ceremony. It was continuation. Thu remained quiet in her movements. As the terrain changed, she preferred open areas with one side bordered by stone or slope. When they came to a cave, she did not enter deeply. She stayed near the outer edge. Others moved deeper. There were no rules about this, but the pattern remained. In time, a new small one began walking. He fell often. He did not speak yet. He followed one of the older females, possibly his birth giver. But he also followed Thu, though she gave no response to this. She never looked directly at him. She did not touch him, but when he followed, she did not move faster, and she did not stop him. Eventually, the small one sat beside her. Once, then again. The group noticed. No one intervened. On the third instance, Thu shifted, not away. She shifted sideways, leaving a space between herself and the child. The space was just large enough for him to fall into sleep without touching her. He did. This pattern too remained. The child sat near her, but never close. Over the following dark light cycles, he began to mimic her walking distance. He paused when she paused. When others sat together, he waited before sitting. If there was no space, he stood. No one instructed this. No one named it. The group's average spacing increased, not significantly, but measurably. They still groomed one another sometimes. They still touched shoulders in moments of coordination or passing. But after sitting, individuals would leave more distance between their knees. When sleeping, there were now visible gaps between most bodies, small but repeated. Thu said nothing. She still positioned herself near trunks. She still moved away when brushed, but not with alarm, only with quiet motion. Over many seasons, the fire changed shape. Once round, it now elongated. Not intentionally. It changed because the people around it had changed. They sat at new distances. The fire adjusted, or rather, the people adjusted the fire. None of this was planned. None of this was discussed. But personal space had shape now. And not only shape, it had memory. When a stranger passed by, a lone male from another group, he attempted to sit near them. He sat too close. They all moved, not all at once, not quickly, but one by one they shifted. Inwardly, outwardly, quietly, until he stood again and left. He did not return. The group did not acknowledge this as an event. But after this, their pattern solidified. A radius around each person became normal. Even the child, now older, respected this radius, especially around Thu. The group moved north when the air grew wet but cold. They had no names for direction. They followed warmth, though they did not speak of it that way. The ground in this region was flatter. Stones were smaller. There were fewer caves. Nights were longer. Some found this troubling. Some did not. At dusk, they began building screens of loosely stacked sticks. These were not walls. They offered no real protection, but they created separations. Individuals placed them beside their own rest spaces. One began, then others did. Soon, most had a barrier, not for weather, not for defense, just for definition. These stick arrangements fell in the wind. No one rebuilt them. New ones were made elsewhere. A child, perhaps 8 or 9 cycles old, built 2 around herself, one in front, one behind. She sat between them, not touching either. Her mother sat nearby, but not within the enclosure. She watched her child, but did not enter. That night, 3 others copied the 2-stick method. By the end of the cold season, over half the group had done so. The fire now burned in 2 long lines. Not a circle. Each line had gaps. Those who sat by it kept their knees inward. If a foot strayed close to another, it was slowly retracted. No one corrected this. No one mentioned it, but it happened repeatedly. One individual, older, nearly blind, forgot this pattern. She sat close to another. He stood and walked away. She remained sitting. Eventually, she moved too. After that, someone guided her gently by the elbow at night, toward an open patch. They placed her near the others, but not too near. She made no sound. She slept. Eventually, she stopped waking up. Her stick screen remained standing for 2 nights. Then it collapsed. The sticks were not reused. The group moved on. In another place, flatter, warmer, a new thing happened. A boy approached another too closely. He was young, barely walking well. He touched the arm of an older male while he was eating. The male paused. He looked at the boy. He blinked once. Then he placed the meat down, stood, and walked 3 body lengths away. The boy looked down. He did not follow. Later, the boy was seen collecting pebbles. He placed one next to his leg, then another a little farther, then a third. A curved line began to form. It was not perfect. It wobbled. But when he sat inside it, he was alone. A female passed. She stopped at the edge of the line. She did not step over it. She waited. Then she turned and walked another way. That night, the boy did not build the pebble ark again, but others remember. A youth made a half ring of bones the next day. He placed them around his sleeping area. Not many, just enough to suggest a shape. No one entered it. Over time, these patterns became habit. Not all made shapes, but all respected them. One day, a new group came. 5 of them. They followed from a distance and then walked close. They were similar. Skin, posture, smell, all alike. But their spacing was different. They stood closer together. When they walked, they brushed shoulders. One of them laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. No one in the original group responded. They stood still. They waited. The new group sat nearby. 2 nearby. 1 night passed. Then a second. On the 3rd morning, the original group walked away without signaling. They did not run. They did not speak. They did not explain. They just moved. The new group followed for a while. Then they stopped. Eventually, they turned in another direction. The original group never mentioned them again. There was nothing to say. Years passed. Those who had known Thu were now gone. But a clearing remained where she once slept. No one dug there. No one sat there. Even after vegetation returned, even after seasons turned, it was always passed by. A younger child once pointed at it. He walked toward it. His mother placed her hand lightly on his back. He turned. They walked away. That was enough. The group began walking slower as time went on. Not from weakness. It simply suited them. New children were born. They learned to crawl at the edge of resting spaces. If they crawled into another space, the other moved, not fast, just enough. Soon, they stopped crawling into those spaces at all. No one remembered who first moved away, or when, but everyone had learned. The space remained. The child was born at the beginning of a cold stretch. The wind did not howl. It moved steadily. He did not cry often. He slept between two stones that had been placed before his birth. They were not arranged deliberately, but they were there. His mother used them as a boundary. He learned to sit before he learned to crawl. When he sat, he looked at others. He watched how they moved. Sometimes they moved together, sometimes apart. He did not know why. He learned not to reach. When another passed nearby, he held his hands close to his chest. When others sat, he looked for the empty place. If there was no empty place, he stood. He was not told to do this. When he was old enough to chew meat, he waited for it to be placed near him. He did not take it from others. If it was far, he did not eat. He watched others more than he moved. He had no name, but some called him Heen, the soft sound he made when breathing in sleep. When he reached half the height of the tallest adult, he began walking with them. He did not lead. He did not follow. He stayed to the side. On one walk, a female fell behind. Heen waited with her. She did not speak. She sat on a low slope. He stood nearby. She pointed to a dead tree. He looked. There was nothing under it, no animal, no danger, just the tree. They did not move for a long time. When the group reappeared in the distance, they rejoined it. No one questioned the delay. Heen began walking beside others more often, not closely, just within reach. But he still stepped away when stopped. He began shaping earth with his heels as Thu had once done. No one had taught him, but the motion felt familiar. He made shallow rests, not deep. He slept in them alone. Later, a younger child came and stepped into his hollow. Heen was already sitting nearby. He stood and walked in a wide arc. He made another. The younger child watched him, then lay down where Heen had been. Heen did not return to that hollow again. Seasons passed. The group found a place with standing stones, not placed by humans. They were shaped by weather. Still, they suggested meaning. Heen chose to sleep near one. It was not tall, but it was upright. Others stayed away. On the fifth night, another sat across from him, on the other side of the stone. They could see each other. They did not speak. In the morning, both were still sitting. They repeated this again the next evening. Others saw. A few began doing the same, finding stones or fallen logs to divide their sleeping spaces. Not all did this. Some remained without structure, but enough followed that it became noticeable. Over time, Heen moved farther away from the group during rest, only slightly. He sat beneath sloped rocks. He dug smaller hollows. When others approached, he stood and gave them space. One child began to follow him. As he had once followed Thu, the child imitated his movements. When Heen placed a flat stone beside his rest, the child found one too. When Heen touched his own chest before walking, the child began doing the same. Heen never looked at the child directly, but he walked more slowly when the child was near. He paused longer near water. He left food scraps in the open. The child grew taller. One day, Heen entered a cave alone. It was not deep. The ceiling was low. Inside, he sat. He did not sleep. He traced lines in the dirt. The lines had no pattern, but he placed his palm next to one. The size of his hand was visible. Then he stood and left. Later, the child found the cave. He saw the lines. He placed his own hand near Heen's. It was smaller. He did not erase the marks. He sat nearby. Then he left. Others never entered the cave. Time passed. Heen aged. His pace slowed. His shoulders curved forward. He no longer made hollows. He sat near existing ones, but not in them. The child, now grown, made hollows again. He made two side by side. Heen sat near them once, then he sat farther, then not at all. Eventually, Heen stopped walking with the group. He stood one morning, then sat again. He remained seated all day. The next day, he was still there. The group did not gather. The child sat nearby for half the day. Again he walked on. Heen did not move again. His hollow remained empty for many days. Then it disappeared under leaves and dust, but the space stayed. The child, now adult, made a ring of stones one day. It was wider than he needed. He sat inside. He closed his eyes. No one entered it. No one asked. The man who once followed Heen was now older. His back did not bend yet, but his knees slowed. He no longer collected kindling. Others did that. He no longer climbed slop. Some still remembered when he had made the wide scone ring and sat inside it. The ring was gone now, washed away by time, covered by soil. But they remembered. A child, no taller than a fire pit, began collecting stones. She made a line, not a ring. She sat on one side of it. She did not look up. No one corrected her. That night, she slept alone. In the morning, she was still there. The line remained. The man watched her from where he sat. He did not speak, but he adjusted his legs slightly. His heel pointed toward her, not away. This was noticed. Others began placing objects near their sleeping places. A curved branch, a flat bone, a heap of dried moss. These were not tools. They were not shelters, but they were indicators. They marked space. Some sat between two bones. Others curled beside one large rock. A boy used his foot to draw a shallow trench around himself before sleeping. It was not deep, but it made a shape. Shapes, once accidental, were now inte. The fire now had 3 separate points, not a single source. 3 small fires lit near dusk. Each had its own cluster of people, never tightly formed, never symmetrical, but consistent. Some moved between the fires. Some stayed by one. Each cluster developed its own distance. The space between 2 people varied slightly from one fire to the next. These small variations were not spoken about, but they were known. One child moved from one fire to another and sat too close. He was bumped, gently, not with force, but with meaning. He sat back. The next night, he sat farther apart. No one told him to. The behavior continued. Rain came harder the next year. Many did not build hollows. They dug small canals instead, to drain water from around their resting spots. The canals also served another purpose. They formed boundaries. The man who had followed Heen now slept between 2 shallow ditches. They were not symmetrical, but they formed a loose oval. Others passed near, but not through. He no longer rose early. When he did stand, it was slow. A younger female offered him roots. He accepted them with a single blink. Later that night, he placed a pebble beside her sleeping place. Then he walked away. She kept the pebble there for many days. Then it was gone. A new generation grew. They did not remember Heen. They never knew Thu, but they lived among shapes. They knew that hollowed places were for individuals, that scones marked rest, that food was passed, not taken, that one should sit slightly apart unless invited by motion, a glance, a lean, a blink. A child named Nothing, he had no name, began to pile dry leaves beside him every night. Then he would blow them away before sleep. He never explained this, but others began doing it too. A group of 3, 2 adults and 1 small, began walking always in a triangle formation. Not close, just evenly spaced. It was not deliberate at first, but it became noticeable. They stood this way even when stopping to drink. Eventually, others copied this pattern in new combinations: rows, arcs, pairs walking wide. From the sky, the group now formed visible shapes, not organized, not symbolic, but patterned. One night, a comet passed. No one called it that, but it was bright. Many watched. Some reached out toward it. Others crouched lower. In the days that followed, a few individuals gathered stones and placed them in a curve facing the sky. They sat behind it, not in worship, but as orientation. Later, this curve was reused, not every night, but regularly. A space began to form, not just around individuals, but around events: the fire, the fallen tree, the curve of stones. These two became centers with distance. No one stepped into the middle without pause. When they crossed a river, they placed pebbles on the bank, small ones, not arranged, but spaced apart. This continued every time they crossed. The pebbles were never removed. Over many seasons, those who had placed the first markers were gone. Their shapes remained for a time, then vanished. But a new custom held. Before lying down, each individual looked around, found a space, and waited. Only after a moment would they begin shaping it. A ring of sticks, a trench, a bone, a pile of moss. Each shape was different, but the act of creating it was the same. No one asked why, but the space remained. Over many cycles of sun and rain, the silent habit of space quietly shaped the lives of those who walked this land long before words. From Thu's shallow resting hollows to Heen's stone rings, and then to the uncounted gestures of generations after, the unspoken understanding of personal space endured. It was neither named nor explained. It simply was. Through time, this space became more than a gap. It became a boundary, a marker, a pattern. It gave shape to rest, to movement, to shared moments. And without fanfare or notice, it grew into a subtle order, a quiet map written not in stone or bone, but in the rhythms of being. As the fire's glow fades and the night grows still, we leave this story where it began, with distance, with quiet, with space. Good night.